November 2024. A Leopard 2A8, a 66-ton behemoth of steel, rumbles across the Ukrainian plains. The sloped front armor gleams in the morning light. The angle, 55 degrees, exactly like 1943. 81 years ago, a German engineer at MAN, a German company, drafted the very same angle, 55 degrees. It was a decision that would forever change tank design. Today, I'll show you why every modern battle tank in the world uses this German invention. From the M1 Abrams to the T-90, from the Leopard to the Challenger, and why Germany never received a single dime for it. Let's start at the beginning. June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. The German army rolls into the Soviet Union, 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, the largest invasion in history. And then, something unexpected happens. German tank crews report strange enemy tanks, tanks that look different from anything they've seen before. Tanks with sloped walls, tanks whose shells are bouncing off. The T-34, the German commanders are shocked. Their 37mm tank cannons are bouncing off. Even the 50mm guns are having problems. The T-34 seems invulnerable. But why? The answer lies in the angle. The T-34 has a front armor of only 45mm. That's less than the German Panzer IV. But those 45mm are sloped at an angle of 60 degrees. And here's where physics comes into play. When a shell hits a sloped plate, it has to travel a longer distance through the material. 45mm at 60 degrees becomes over 90mm of effective thickness. Almost twice as much protection, with the same weight. That is the secret of sloped armor. More protection without more weight. Simple geometry that saves lives. The Germans recognize this immediately. General Major Ernest Fessmann writes a report. He describes the T-34 as revolutionary. He demands a German response. General Henry Guderian establishes a tank commission. Its purpose, to analyze the T-34, to figure out what makes it so effective. The commission identifies 3 key elements. First, the long, overhanging gun, greater range, more penetrating power. Second, the wide tracks, better off-road capability, less ground pressure. Third, the sloped armor, more protection at the same weight. The recommendation is clear. Germany needs a new tank, a tank that combines these elements, a tank that surpasses the T-34. The project begins in January 1942. 2 companies receive the contract, Mercedes-Benz and MAN. They are to develop prototypes. The better one wins. Mercedes-Benz delivers a design that looks surprisingly similar to the T-34. The turret sits far forward. The silhouette is low. Adolf Hitler is thrilled. But MAN has a different approach. The MAN engineers study the T-34. They analyze its strengths, they recognize its weaknesses, and they develop something better. The MAN design has a central turret, better weight distribution, better firing angles, and the front armor, 80mm at 55 degrees. This is the decisive moment, 55 degrees, not 60 like the T-34, not 45 like earlier German designs, exactly 55. Why this angle? The MAN engineers calculated, they tested, they found the optimal compromise. At 55 degrees, the effective thickness is maximal, but the interior remains usable. The crew has space. The mechanics work. 80mm at 55 degrees becomes 139mm of effective thickness, almost 75% more protection than the bare steel thickness, and it gets even better. If the enemy doesn't shoot exactly head-on, the angles increase further. A shot from 45 degrees to the side hits an effective thickness of 197mm. That's more than the front armor of the Tiger Eye. With less weight, the German army recognizes the potential. The MAN design is chosen. Despite Hitler's preference for Mercedes-Benz, the engineers have won. The new tank gets a name, Panzerkampfwagen V, the Panther tank. January 1943, the first series production begins. MAN in Nuremberg, Mercedes-Benz in Berlin, Maschinenfabrik Niedersachsen in Hanover. The factories are running at full speed. By May 1943, 324 Panthers are built. They are to be used in the large summer offensive, the Battle of Kursk. But here the problem begins. The Panther is new, untested in battle. The crews have barely any training. The mechanics are prone to failures. At Kursk, many Panthers fail, not from enemy fire, but from technical problems, transmission damage, engine fires, track breaks. The Soviets cheer. They believe the Panther is a failure, but they are wrong. The German engineers work feverishly. They fix the teething problems. They improve the transmission. They reinforce the suspension. From autumn 1943, the Panther is a deadly weapon, and the sloped armor proves itself. Soviet 76mm cannons bounce off, even from close range. The T-34 crews are shocked. They have an opponent who is giving them a taste of their own medicine. The Soviets send captured Panthers to Aberdeen Proving Ground, an equivalent to their Russian proving grounds, for thorough testing. There, they dismantle every inch. They measure, they analyze, they learn. What they find confirms their worst fears. The 55-degree armor is superior, better than their own 60-degree solution. The Panther offers more protection at less weight. The Soviet engineers take notes, many notes. And here begins the story that remains hidden to this day. 1944. The Morozov Design Bureau in Kharkiv works on a new tank, the successor to the T-34. It should be larger, stronger, better protected. The T-44. And if you look at the front armor of the T-44, you will notice something interesting. The angle has changed. It is no longer 60 degrees like the T-34. It is 55 degrees, exactly like the Panther. Coincidence? The Soviet archives say no. The Aberdeen Proving Ground reports show that Soviet engineers expressly recommended the 55-degree angle. They show that the Panther served as a model. They show that the Soviets copied. The T-44 became the precursor to the T-54. The T-54 became the precursor to the T-55. The T-55 became the most produced tank in history, over 100,000 units, all with 55-degree front armor, all based on a German concept. But the Soviets were not the only ones who learned. The Americans brought captured Panthers to Aberdeen Proving Ground. They tested, they analyzed, they were impressed. The 55-degree armor was vastly superior to the American 0-degree front armor of the Sherman. The Sherman had 51 millimeters of armor vertically. The Panther tank had 139 millimeters, effectively, almost 3 times as much protection. The American engineers got the message. Future tanks needed sloped armor, and not just any sloped armor, the right kind. After the war, American tank design changed. The M46 pattern had sloped armor, the M47 too. The M48 refined the concept, and the M60 perfected it. And then came the M1 Abrams. Take a look at the Abrams. Check out the front armor, the angle, you guessed it, close to 55 degrees. The optimal solution that man discovered back in 1942, but the story doesn't end there. In 1956, West Germany began developing a new tank, the Leopard 1. The German engineers knew their history. They knew what the Panther tank could do. They knew what worked. The Leopard 1 has sloped front armor, not as extreme as the Panther tank, but the principle is the same. In 1979, the Leopard 2 arrived, and this is where it gets interesting. The Leopard 2 has front armor with an angle of approximately 55 degrees, the same angle that man calculated back in 1942. The circle is complete. Germany was again building tanks with 55-degree armor. The invention had come full circle, back to its origin. But no one paid royalties. No one acknowledged the origin. The world used German technology and acted like it was brand new. That's the story of the 55-degree armor, but let me show you even more. The physics behind it are fascinating, and they explain why the 55-degree angle is so optimal. When a projectile hits armor, several things happen simultaneously. First, the projectile has to travel a longer distance through the material. The steeper the angle, the longer the path. Second, the projectile tends to rotate upon impact. It normalizes itself to the armor, but at certain angles, this doesn't work so well. Third, at very steep angles, the projectile can bounce off. It slides away without penetrating. This is the ricochet effect. The 55-degree angle maximizes all three effects at the same time. The path through the material is long enough to stop the projectile. Normalization is difficult, and ricochets are probable. More modern analyses have shown that the range between 55 and 65 degrees is optimal. Exactly the range that German engineers intuitively found in 1942. They had no computers, no simulations, just slide rules and experiments, and they found the right answer. That's German engineering, precision through intellect. If you appreciate these technical truths and want to support my research, please use the Super Thanks feature below this video. Every contribution helps me continue documenting these forgotten stories. But let's get back to the story. The Panther tank wasn't the first tank with sloped armor. The T-34 came first. The French Somme S-35 had it even before the war. But the Panther tank perfected the concept. The T-34 had 60 degrees, too steep. The interior was cramped. The crew suffered. The Somme had various angles, inconsistent, difficult to produce. The Panther tank had 55 degrees, consistent, thoughtful, optimal. And that's precisely why the Panther tank became the model. Not the T-34, not the Somme, the Panther tank. Let me give you concrete examples. The British Centurion, developed from 1943 to 1945. The first prototypes still had vertical armor, but the production models from 1946 onward sloped front. The angle between 50 and 58 degrees, suspiciously close to the Panther tank. The British had analyzed Panther tanks. They had read the Aberdeen Proving Ground reports that the Soviets shared. They knew what worked. The Centurion became one of the most successful tanks of the post-war era. It fought in Korea, in the Middle East, in Vietnam, everywhere with German sloped armor. The French AMX-13, developed from 1946 onward. The French had lost the war. But they had captured Panther tanks. They had studied them. The AMX-13 has characteristic sloped armor. The angle corresponds to the Panther tank. The French copied without asking. Why would they? Germany no longer had any claims. The Swedish Stridsvagn 103, the S-tank, the most radical tank design of the post-war era, a boxy wedge, no turret, maximum slope. The Swedes had studied the Panther tank concept. They had taken it to the extreme. If sloped armor is good, why not maximum sloped armor? The S-tank had a 60-degree frontal slope, even more extreme than the Panther tank. The physics worked. The tank was practically immune to frontal hits. That's the influence of the Panther tank. Not just copied, further developed, radicalized. The Soviet engineers copied the 55-degree angle. The American engineers copied it. The British engineers copied it. The French, the Swedes, everyone. Only the Germans themselves had to reinvent it after the war, because what happened in 1945 was devastating. The Allies confiscated all German tank developments, drawings, prototypes, test reports, everything. The companies were dismantled. Man was no longer allowed to build tanks. Mercedes-Benz had to focus on cars. The knowledge was scattered. When Germany was allowed to develop tanks again in 1956, they had to start from scratch. Their own inventions had become public domain. The Leopard 1 used concepts that Germany had invented, but they were no longer German. They were international. That's the bitter irony. Germany invented the 55-degree armor. The world copied it. And then Germany had to buy it back conceptually. No patent protected the invention. No contract secured royalties. Spoils of war, no copyrights. But let me show you the numbers, the concrete numbers. From 1943 to 1945, about 6,000 Panther tanks were built. That was the basis. That was the proof that the concept worked. From 1945 to 1991, over 100,000 T-54s and T-55s were built, all with 55-degree armor, all based on Panther tank analyses. From 1950 to 1980, over 50,000 M48 and M60 patterns were built, all with sloped armor, all inspired by German tests. From 1945 to 1970, over 4,000 Centurions were built, all with sloped armor, all with Panther tank DNA. That's over 160,000 tanks. In the first generations after the war alone, all with a design element that Germany invented. And the modern tanks, the Abrams, over 10,000 built, the Leopard 2, over 3,500, the T-72 and T-90 combined, over 30,000. The total number of tanks utilizing 55-degree sloped armor sits at over 250,000, maybe even 300,000. No one knows for sure. What would that have been worth? If Germany had received even just €1 per tank in licensing fees. 300,000 euros sounds like a small amount, but let's calculate this a different way. A modern Leopard 2 costs approximately 20 million euros. The armor might account for, say, 10% of that cost, 2 million euros. Across 3,500 Leopard 2s, that's 7 billion euros just for the armor plating. And the Abrams tank? Similar numbers. What about the T-90? The Challenger? The Leclerc? The total sum runs into the hundreds of billions. And Germany received nothing. That's the financial aspect of this story, the aspect no one calculates, the aspect no one mentions. But let me show you what's happening today, 2024. The Ukraine War. Leopard 2 tanks fight against T-72s and T-90s. On both sides, 55-degree sloped armor. On both sides, German design concepts. The Leopard has composite armor, modern materials, but the fundamental principle remains the same. 55 degrees, the optimal angle. The T-90 has reactive armor, explosive elements, but the basic form is identical, 55 degrees, inherited from the T-44, inherited from the Panther. German technology fighting against German technology. And no one remembers where it originated. That is the legacy of the Panther. But there's another aspect, one that is rarely discussed, the disadvantages of sloped armor. Yes, there are disadvantages. The German engineers were aware of them. They accepted them as a compromise. Firstly, less interior space. Slanted walls mean less room inside. The crew is cramped. The equipment has to be more compact. Secondly, longer plates. To protect the same height, you need longer plates. That means more material, more weight. Thirdly, more complex production. Slanted plates are harder to weld. The joints are more complicated. The Germans accepted these drawbacks. The gain in protection was worth it. But modern tanks have found ways to minimize these disadvantages. The M1 Abrams uses composite armor. Layers of different materials, ceramics, steel, polycarbonate. The slope is less critical when the material itself is strong. Nevertheless, it retains the slanted angle. The physics don't change. More angle always means more protection. The Leopard 2 takes a similar approach, composite armor, combined with angling, the best of both worlds. And even the latest Russian tanks, like the T-14 Armata, have sloped frontal armor. The angle, you guessed it, the lesson from 1943 still applies. Physics doesn't change. But let me show you something else. The psychological effect of sloped armor. The Panther looked different from any German tank before it. The slanting lines were unfamiliar. They signaled modernity, progress. Allied soldiers learned to fear the Panther, not just because of its firepower, because of its appearance. The sloped armor looked menacing, and that aesthetic has endured. Modern tanks look sloped. This is no accident. It's heritage, the heritage of the Panther. The M1 Abrams has those sloped lines. The Leopard 2 has them. Even the Israeli Merkava has them. Form follows function, and that function was defined in 1943. That is cultural heritage, technical heritage, German heritage, but no one calls it that. Let me show you another aspect, one that shows just how profound the influence was. Tank production. The Panther wasn't only revolutionary because of its armor, it was revolutionary because of its production methods. The 55-degree armor required new welding techniques. The plates had to be joined at angles. That was harder than vertical joints. The German engineers developed new procedures: butt welding, lap welding, interlocking plates. These procedures were adopted after the war. Every tank factory in the world today uses techniques developed for the Panther. The Soviet factories in Nizhny Tagil learned from German prisoners of war how to weld sloped armor. The American factories in Detroit learned from confiscated documents, that is technology transfer, on a scale that no one mentions. Not only the design was copied, the entire production method was copied. And here, it gets even more interesting. The Panther had a problem. The early models had poor welds, the plates fractured upon impact. The German engineers solved that problem. They developed interlocking plate joints. The plates meshed together. Even if the weld broke, the interlocking kept it together. That technique became standard. Every modern tank has interlocking armor plates. The technique was invented in Nuremberg. It is used in every country in the world. And no one paid. But there's yet another aspect, one that points towards the future: composite armor. The Panther had homogeneous steel armor, one alloy, one layer. That was the state of the art in 1943. But the German engineers were already experimenting with multi-layered armor. They tested combinations of hard and soft steel. They tested ceramic inlays. These experiments were confiscated in 1945. The reports ended up in British and American archives. In the 1960s, the British developed Chobham armor, layers of ceramic and steel, modern composite armor. The foundations, found in German archives, developed by German engineers, intended for the successor to the Panther. The Leopard 2 has composite armor. The M1 Abrams has it. The Challenger 2 has it, all based on research confiscated after 1945. That is the extended story of the 55-degree armor, not just the angle, the entire philosophy of tank protection. Germany invented it, the world copied it, and Germany today pays prices for tanks that contain its own concepts. The irony is painful. Now, I come to the question, you're probably asking, why did no one pay? The answer is simple and bitterly ironic. Germany lost the war. Losers have no patent rights. Losers have no claims. What the Allies confiscated in 1945 belonged to them. Intellectual reparations. They called it as if knowledge was a debt to be paid. The 55-degree armor became public domain. Anyone could use it. No one had to ask. Man still exists today. They build trucks. No more tanks. Daimler-Benz still exists today. They build Mercedes-Benz. No more tanks, though. The companies that developed the Panther tank have vanished from the tank business. Others have taken over. Krauss-Maffei, Rheinmetall. They build the Leopard too. They utilize concepts that others developed. That's the reality of the arms industry. Knowledge flows, patents expire, wars erase claims. But the physics remain 55 degrees, the optimal angle, discovered in 1942, utilized in 2024, and forever. Let me wrap things up. The Panther was more than just a tank. It was a revolution. The 55-degree sloped armor defined modern tank design. It set a standard that still applies today. Every modern main battle tank carries this German legacy. The M1 Abrams, the Leopard 2, the Challenger 2, the Leclerc, the T-90, the Merkava, hundreds of thousands of tanks, all with the same basic principle, all based on a decision that man engineers made in 1942. 55 degrees, simple math, world-altering consequences. And what did Germany get for it? Nothing, zero, zilch. The greatest innovation in 20th century tank design was given away, not voluntarily, through defeat. But let me tell you one last story. A story that shows just how deep the influence really goes. 2023, the Russian army is losing thousands of tanks in Ukraine. T-72s, T-80s, even T-90s. Analysts are wondering why. The tanks do have 55-degree armor. They should be protected. The answer lies in a detail that the Panther never had: the carousel. Soviet tanks have automatic loaders. The ammunition is located in a carousel under the turret. If a shell hits this carousel, the entire ammunition store explodes. The turret is blown off. Western engineers call it the jack-in-the-box effect. Hundreds of Russian tanks have been destroyed this way. And here's the connection to the Panther. The Panther had its ammunition stored on the sides, distributed, not concentrated. A hit could cause a few shells to explode, but not all of them at once. Western tanks followed this principle. The Leopard 2 has its ammunition in a separate compartment. With a blow-off panel, if the ammunition explodes, the blast is directed outward. The crew often survives. Soviet engineers ignored this principle. They wanted more compact tanks, lower silhouettes, so they concentrated the ammunition. That worked, as long as no one hit the tank. In Ukraine, though, everyone is hitting everyone. The 55-degree armor protects, but when a modern anti-tank missile penetrates, the result is catastrophic for Russian tanks. For Western tanks, it's bad, but survivable. That's the extended legacy of the Panther, not just the angle, the entire philosophy of tank protection. German engineers thought of everything: ammunition storage, crew protection, secondary explosions. They had a holistic concept. The Soviets only copied the angle. They didn't adopt the philosophy. 80 years later, Russian tank crews are dying because their designers only did half the job. That's the final irony of the story. The Panther was more than 55 degrees. It was a complete concept, systems thinking, a philosophy of survival. The world copied the form. They forgot the content. And today, Russian soldiers are paying the price. That's the story that engineers admit today, the story that's not in any textbook, the story of the 55-degree armor, from Friedrichshafen to Fort Knox, from the Battle of Kursk to Kiev, from 1943 to today. The physics doesn't change, the angle remains. But let me give you another perspective, one that looks to the future. The tank of the future. Rheinmetall is working on the Kf-51 Panther. Yes, you heard right, Panther. The name is back. The new Panther has sloped frontal armor. The angle, you guessed it, close to 55 degrees. The optimal solution from 1942 still applies, but the new Panther has more: active protection systems, drone defense, artificial intelligence, technology from 2024, and yet it's based on principles from 1943, the angle, the ammunition storage, the crew arrangement. It all goes back to the original Panther. That's the ultimate legacy. 81 years later, Rheinmetall builds a tank and calls it Panther. They recognize the heritage. They show where the ideas come from. The circle is closing. Man developed the first Panther. Rheinmetall is building the new one, both in Germany. Both with 55-degree armor, both with the same name. History has a long memory, physics has an eternal one. What the man engineers calculated in 1942 also applies in 2024. What they found with slide rules, computers confirm today. The optimal angle for sloped armor is between 55 and 65 degrees. That's not an opinion. That's physics. And this physics was discovered in Germany, in Nuremberg, in the design offices of man. That shouldn't be forgotten. When the next war comes and tanks roll, they will all have the same angle, 55 degrees, the German invention that no one recognizes as German. But you know it now. You know the story. You understand where the form comes from. The next time you see a modern main battle tank, look at the frontal armor, look at the angle, and think of the man engineers from 1942. They changed the world. With a protractor and a lot of brains. Write me in the comments. Did you know about this connection? Did you know that all modern tanks use the Panther concept? Should Germany get recognition? I'm curious about your opinion. Share this video with someone who is interested in tank technology. The truth about the 55 degrees deserves to be spread, and if you want to see more of these forgotten technology stories, then subscribe to this channel. Activate the bell to never miss a documentary. Every day, new insights into German engineering and its impact on the modern world. If you want to support this research, use the Super Thanks feature. Every contribution helps me bring more forgotten stories to light. The story of the 55-degree armor is just the beginning. There are many more German inventions that the world has silently adopted. Transmissions, engines, weapons, electronics. The list is endless. The 55 degrees is just one example. An example of systematic technology transfer, an example of knowledge that was taken and never paid for. But now, you know. Now you know the truth, and knowledge is the first step towards understanding. The 55 degrees are waiting, history is waiting, and you are now part of those who are in the know. Until next time.